Welcome to this episode of the Dio Samuel Report. I am Dio Samuel, and I hope that you can hear me right now and you can see me. Thank you again for joining me on this freshly launched podcast. I launched this podcast just last week with the first episode where we talked about how jack of all trades become experts. Today, I want to take that conversation further by sharing with you how jack of all trades become expert. And what I want to do in this podcast, as with what I started last week, is to actually share what I've found from all my years of research into the subject of multi-potentiality, having multiple interests, having divergent, what they call neurodiversity, and all those different things, being a polymath, building a business out of that, making sure you are able to at least get people to do things, say things, how you can actually build a business around the multiple different passions, multiple different interests, multiple different skills that you have. And that's exactly what I'm trying to do with the podcast. Now, just before I continue, I want to be sure that this session is going properly. So, just in case you are joining me live as I'm recording this, please leave a comment and let me know that you can hear me. Let me know that you can see me. Let me know if my background soundtrack is too loud. Please let me know so that I can adjust that as well. All right. So, as we proceed to give you what you need, let me go back to those my days of being a DJ. And actually, that's another story that I will probably tell someday. Maybe I should tell it now. Should I? Okay. So a couple of years ago, again, just as I told the story last week, at a point in my life, I was trying to merge music and design together. I started with music and because I wanted to learn how to use computer that much. So I started with music and then I started using computers and the two of them began to work together to a large extent. But where the and while I was trying to be a musician, one of the things I did was actually one of the things I did actually was to be a DJ. And when I say be a DJ, I mean I literally was being paid by people to talk to run parties. I was being paid by people to do that. So, and that has kind of influenced my idea of what, in fact, it was one of the reasons why I started a podcast back in 2014, because as at that point, when I stopped being a DJ and moved to go to university to study, when I came back from the university, one of the ways that I was able to transfer the knowledge of being a DJ, transfer the knowledge of using media, using all those things was in what's the name? Being a media guy for a church organization. And when I say being a media guy for a church organization, I mean I was the media staff. I was also handling brand strategy. I was handling visual presentations. I was creating radio jingles, radio productions. I was handling all the stuff that goes out via media, that's via local media, both in two cities. And that's just where I started from. And today, that experience, when in 2014, when I left that job, that experience transferred into my idea of a podcast. So the fact that I started with trying to be a DJ, trying to produce music, that moved into me being that moved into the idea, that moved into my podcast. So when I started my podcast, I brought in a lot of some of the mix that I've been used to being a DJ, some of the things that I've known being somebody who's trying to use Fruity Loops, use Cubase to create music, all those days. That came into, so I started using Adobe Audition and all of that. And I'm just telling you that story to let you know that jack of all trades, they can become experts. They may not necessarily become specialists, but they can become experts. And what I mean by jack of all trades becoming experts is that even when you find yourself learning something completely new, because your brain is wired in a certain way. And because of that, it makes learning faster for people like us. And so, runners talk about the high they get once they are warmed up. Athletes, they talk about the high they get when they get warmed up, when they are in a flow and they are going. Now, it turns out that we humans, We get the same exact kind of high from reading, from learning, from jamming, like when you are in a session with someone and the person can feel your vibe, both of you are operating at the same frequency. That also happens with humans. It's a flow state. And what happens is that it gets even more interesting when the human involved is a jack of all trades. It means if the conversation flows a certain direction, you can get that, you can flow with that conversation. And if the conversation flows another direction, because you are a jack of all trade who is a master of many things, you can also flow with that with the new direction. Now, and I like to call it follow the flow. The jack of all trades can follow the flow and learn something that would take someone else 30 months to learn. And in my own experience, something that would take someone else 30 months to learn, as a jack of all trades, sometimes we master the thing in 30 weeks. And in some cases, we master such in 30 days. There's a process and a science behind it. Books like Flow States, States of Altai, I think something about consciousness. I once did a video about the different modes of consciousness, the different levels of consciousness. Maybe I'll link that in the video, but it's completely on a different channel. So maybe that will lead you to an historic channel that I used to run many years ago. But what I'm sharing here is to let you understand that no matter the stage you're in, you can always master certain things. And today what I want to do is I want to bring two different bodies of knowledge together to help you understand the process that jack of all trades go through in order to master multiple skills faster at the same time, faster than other persons who are wired differently. Now, I'm going to share my screen here and we're going to talk about that. I'm going to take it from the perspective of mastery. So let me bring my screen up here. So let me share my screen. Let me bring my screen up. Let me get my screen up. Now I'm streaming this through my software. So unlike the first episode that I did it directly with just my camera, and now it's not allowing me to stream. You can imagine. It's not allowing me to stream. It's not allowing me to share my screen, which is not nice. And that's the thing about this particular software. This is the first time I'm using it. I tried to use it privately. It seemed to work, but here it is. It's not working anymore. I don't know what to do, but I'll probably continue anyway. So if you're listening to me right now, since I can share my screen, I actually have my drawing here that I wanted to share, but it appears not to be able to come on the stream right now. But what I want to actually let you understand is the fact that if you pick the word mastery and you take the word mastery, let's say you put the word mastery on the screen right now. I like to show and not just tell. But for the particular situation right now, it appears that I may not be able to show. I would rather just tell, and that's unfortunate. So if you pick the word mastery and you say, this is the word mastery, how do you master something? Or how do you get to that point of becoming an expert at multiple things? Now, I want you to take the word mastery, and if you can, draw two lines across the word mastery. So you draw mastery and you say, okay, mastery, there's mastery of self, there's mastery of craft. Now, mastery of self is the mastery of you being able to master yourself, being able to master your, there are 5 or 6 things that I used to talk about when it comes to mastery of self. There is a mastery of your spirit, there's a mastery of fear, there's a mastery of uncertainty, there's a mastery of, have I mentioned the mastery of the spirit? Now, let me explain what each of those mean, just to give you a little bit of context. So, mastery of the spirit is you as a human being able to understand how you create transformations in your own life, how you make changes happen. It's almost like the mastery of the spirit and the mastery of transformation. Now, second is the mastery of fear. Now, mastery of fear means that you are able to know what exactly makes you get fearful and what you have to do in order to get out of that fearful state, because every fear is a state of being. And if you understand the mastery of the spirit, coming to the mastery of fear, it means you can use the mastery of the spirit to jack yourself out of being in a state of fear. But that's something, again, that I'll probably talk about in a completely new episode, perhaps down the line. Now, there's also the mastery of your craft. And I'm going to go to the mastery of craft. Of course, I said when it comes to mastery, there's a mastery of self, there's a mastery of your craft. The mastery of your craft has to do with the stages you go through in order to become an expert. Now, there is something developed by two brothers back then called the uh, what's the name again? It's a model that actually that shows 5 steps. I think it's developed by two brothers, something about Butch or something like that. Um, I'm trying to remember the exact word because I actually know it. The something model. It's called the something model of. It's not the hierarchy of competence. There's a Neubauer hierarchy of competence. There is a. I'm trying to remember the actual word. There's a specific word that I'm trying to remember, and that's what's creating problem for me right now. Now, that's another thing about being a jack of all trades. As a jack of all trades, sometimes it can be difficult to keep things in your head. What I've learned in my life experience is to capture a lot of things that are run through my mind. Over the past 15 plus years, I've used physical notebooks. And let me see if I can find some of them. Okay. If you look at right now, I still have a physical notebook on my table. Over the past 10 to 15 years, I've used physical notebooks. But last year, 2023, I began to transfer everything into Notion. Because I came to that point where I began to understand that I am not, in order to create things that will last beyond my lifetime, I probably need to create them in a way that is digitized so that more people can actually access them even after I'm gone. And I know some of you will think right now that, wait, what are you thinking about when you're gone? Well, that's because one of the things that drive me is the word legacy. And when I say legacy, I mean, I'm always thinking of the future. I'm always thinking of what we leave behind after we are gone. And so that's why I'm always thinking about what will be my impact in 15 years? What will be my impact in 10 years? What will be my impact in 60 years? What will be my impact? I'm always thinking about that. And because being a jack of all trades, being a multi-potentialite, being a polymath, being a generalist, I understand that we get to be interested in a lot of things. Leonardo da Vinci was just like that. Albert Einstein was just exactly like that. They were all individuals that were interested in a range of things. And because they can range nicely, they can range very well, it makes it interesting for them to discover new things, to bring 3 different things and form one thing that becomes completely unique. So for example, like the theory of relativity. I don't want to go the path of science right now because I can geek a little bit on science. Of course, I have science background because that was where I studied. Going to when I went to college, or what they call secondary school, I actually was in a science class, but I had a distaste of science. In fact, physics was the only science course that I constantly did well in. The first one is Yoruba language. If you are from Nigeria, you understand what Yoruba language is. Yoruba language is one of the 3 dominant languages in Nigeria. Yoruba language is the course that I excelled in the most, followed by physics. So I had A in Yoruba language and I had B in physics. But every other course, I had F. And by the way, that's also another story for another time that I can also share with you. But anyway, let's get back to the model that I was talking about. So that model is called the Dreyfus model of skill acquisition. Now, the Dreyfus model of skill acquisition has 5 parts to it. Now that I cannot share my screen, I'm basically just going to be I'm going to be reading it out, or maybe, let me say, read it out to you so that it's easier for you to understand. So when we talk about the Dreyfus model of skill acquisition, I want you to imagine a triangle. And with that triangle, I want you to divide that triangle into 5 steps. So that is, you draw 1, 2, 3, 4 lines in the triangle. So that means this is the triangle, and you simply draw 4 lines in the triangle. In fact, if you can walk through it right now, will make this a lot easier for you. Now, at the base of the triangle is where we have novice. This and novice, let me explain what that novice is. Now, at this initial stage of being a novice, what happens is that as a jack of all trade, you have a little to no experience in a specific skill. You are able to what you rely on heavily then is you're basically finding out the rules and guidelines in order to perform certain tasks, and you may have difficulty handling complexities. So things that are complex, you may not have the ability to handle them. So it's almost like when, like this software, okay, good case point, or good point in case or case in point. I'm trying to use this live stream software right now called Riverside, and I've tried it earlier with someone else. It seemed to work fine, but today is the first time I'm using live stream feature. And interestingly, it happens that while it allowed share earlier on, now I can't see the feature. The share feature is disabled. I don't know why. It says someone else is currently sharing. I don't know why. I'm the only one in the meeting, so I don't know why he's saying that that's sharing. Now, the first time I opened up Riverside, I was a complete novice. I did not know how to use the software. But the moment I looked through it, what happened was I transferred my experience from softwares like StreamYard, softwares like, that even reminds me, maybe I should have gone with StreamYard instead of this. Well, maybe because there were features I was looking for that Riverside has that StreamYard doesn't have. Maybe I'll investigate that afterwards. So what I did was I simply transferred my learnings from StreamYard to this software. And it was easy for me to quickly navigate and understand, okay, this is what this means. This is how to connect this. Interestingly, I seem to like the connection between StreamYard and YouTube than I like the connection between Riverside and YouTube. Now, that's also another thing. Now, when you are at that novice level, what happens is you are basically focused on handling complexities. You are trying to understand the rules and the patterns and the guidelines for mastering any skill. Now, that's the first level. The second level is what the Dreyfus brothers called advanced beginner. And they call it advanced beginner because this is where you begin to accumulate experiences that enable you to perform that task. You begin to recognize that, oh, this is something I know. This is something I've tried before. So it's almost like driving. When you're learning to drive, you learn the rudiments step by step by step by step. But once you begin to drive, if you change to another car, so let's say you go from manual to an automatic car, what happens is you are not learning to drive completely all over again. What you're doing is you're basically transferring the learning from driving a manual car to driving an automatic car. That learned experience, that transference of skills is what makes jack of all trades easy to be able to go from novice to advanced beginner to the next stage, which is competence. Now, the third level is where you become competent on something. And this is where you begin to acquire a little bit of experience. You are able to understand that there's a better understanding for this particular skill you're learning. You are allowing yourself to deal with the complexities and make decisions based on your own judgment. Now, at this point, you are beginning to have a little bit of consistent performance in the sense that when you're asked about something, you're able to answer. When you need to deliver on something or deliver an outcome, you're able to do that. That's the third stage. Now, as you begin to do that over time, you get to the fourth stage, which Dreyfus model labels as proficient. Now, this proficient level is where you have a deep understanding of that skill and you're able to intuitively grasp situations and contexts and problems where you can actually apply some of the things you've learned, but you can also arise beyond the rules and guidelines that guide that particular skill. And I'm going to use a particular example now to explain everything. Now, once you go past that proficient level, the fifth level, which is the highest level, is that level of experts. And this is where you have vast background, extensive background, or what I call experiential background. Experiential background is where it is not something you're trying to learn. You are basically coming from the part that, okay, I've done this over and over and over and over and over again. So I can ditch the rules, I can ditch the guidelines, I can create or I can operate, I can learn this thing, I can master this thing based on my own unique journey, based on my own unique path. And this is that part where you get to have grasp of situations. It's where you begin to contextualize things faster than every other person. Now, it's also at this expert level that you're able to innovate on new solutions. You're able to adapt other things to fit into a particular frame that you're trying to operate in. You are able to operate with a high degree of flexibility, and you're able to redefine what it means to do that particular thing. Or maybe you're redefining practices and theories within that field, or maybe with that particular skill. So it's almost like what I'm doing right now. And that's where I'm going to bring you this first example. And this example I want to let you understand again is driving. So if you've driven so much, you've spent a lot of time driving. If you travel to a new country, so for example, let's say you've been driving in a country like Nigeria, where the steering wheel is to the left. And then you've driven for, let's say, a lot of times, you've driven for many years, you've become an expert there. Now, once you come to the UK, for example, you come to the UK and you realize that, oh, driving is to the right. Now, again, because you've achieved expert status back in Nigeria, in the UK, what you are basically you're not achieving expert level because you've been driving from this angle and then you are coming to this angle. It means the gear is also changing position. So if you're someone who uses right, it means now you have to use the left. Now, what I'm trying to help you understand is that if you've achieved expert level, you've been able to maneuver your way, you've been able to ditch the rules and guidelines. Once you go into a completely new context, you go back to proficient level. And so when you go back to that proficient level, you are able to quickly pick up. So unlike someone else who is not a jack of all trades, who is not neurodivergent, who does not have the breadth of brain, so to say, to be able to master new things, learn new things, what happens is you are able to go from, oh, I need to learn this thing to, oh, I've learned it before. I can simply transfer that learning experience into this new thing that I'm learning. Now, I also have to mention that in between those 5 stages that I've just mentioned now, when I was doing NLP, so for example, in 2017, when I was taking NLP, one of the things I found was there's also a different model of achieving an expert status. And they call them the 4 levels of competencies. Now, these 4 levels of competencies, again, I wish that there was the ability to share screen here. I'll probably have shared my screen and brought it up. I will actually report this to Riverside Support because I don't know why that kept happening. I think I should actually take a screenshot of it. So let me do alternate shift insert. Hopefully that creates a screenshot. If it doesn't, that's all. Okay. It freezes on my screen. That's all right. Anyway, so going back to the second model of mastering multiple skills in less time, how jack of all trades master multiple skills in less time. Now, what I found when I was taking my NLP certification back then in 2017 was that there's these 4 stages of competence model that I think, was it Bandler, I think Richard Bandler or someone that began to teach it. And it has to do with how we learn new skills. And this has to do with your mind, because as you learn skills physically, what's happening is your brain is learning. As we say in neuro-linguistic programming, we say you cannot not learn. You are always learning. And because you're always learning, that learning goes through 4 stages. So how does jack of all trades, how do they master new skills or multiple skills in less time? Well, if you understand that Dreyfus model, that triangle that I've explained earlier on, if you go between the first level to the second level, so each of the 4 lines that you've drawn, I want you to label each of those 4 lines right now. And the first line between novice and beginner, I want you to label that as unconscious incompetence. Now, unconscious incompetence, this is where you, as an individual, you do not understand or know how to do something, and you do not necessarily recognize the conflict or the deficit that you may have when it comes to being able to do that thing. Now, you may deny the usefulness of the skill because you are a novice, you are not even learning it yet. So, but the moment you recognize that, oh, this is something I'm interested in, you move to the next level. You move between advanced beginner to someone between competent. Now, I need to explain that this way. So, in order to understand these four stages of competence, what you need to understand is that there is unconscious, there is conscious. Unconscious is where learning has gone from what you physically do to what your mind has absorbed, your mind has taken in so much that you are able to. So, for example, when I was in the university, my friends will wake me up, will call me. Those days we used to have free midnight calls. So my friends would call me in the night and I will be on my bed, not in front of my laptop, and I'll be telling them where to click in order to do something in Photoshop, in order to do something in CorelDRAW. That's how much I've done that. Now, when you get to that point where you're able to recall things without necessarily being in front of that, you've gone to that unconscious level. Now, that's conscious, unconscious. Conscious is it takes your mind, it takes your attention, it requires you paying attention in order to do it. Unconscious means even when you're not paying attention, you are able to do that. Now, competence and incompetence. So let's put incompetence here. Incompetence here means that you do not know how to do that thing. Competence is you know how to do that thing. You have achieved the competent, proficient level in that Dreyfus model. Now, how to make sense of all of this is that if you pair those conscious, unconscious, competence, incompetence, if you pair them together, you get four different things. First one is unconscious incompetence, which is what I've just explained, where you do not understand how to do something and you may not necessarily recognize the deficits that you have when it comes to doing that thing. The second stage is conscious incompetence. At this point, you are conscious that you don't know how to do it. So you do not understand or know how to do that thing, but you recognize that I need to learn how to do this thing. And you are able to see the value in learning, in mastering that thing. Now, the third stage is conscious competence. Conscious competence is where you understand or know how to do something. However, demonstrating the skill or the knowledge requires concentration. It requires you to pay attention. It requires you to break things down into steps, into guidelines. Remember the guidelines from the first model? It allows you to break things down into guidelines so that what I'm trying to say is there is heavy conscious involvement in executing this new skill. Now, you get to the fourth level, which is unconscious competence. It means it's gone beyond you paying attention to you being able to operate in an automatic level. It means you're able to do it even when you are not paying attention, it operates or it flows through you automatically. Now, because you've done so much of practice, you've mastered that thing so much that it has become a second nature, and you can perform, you can deliver outcomes easily. Now, as a result, the skill can be performed while executing another task. So, this is where you get to the point where you're able to become a jack of all trades, really, because you can do one thing while doing another thing. And as we say in NLP, how you do one thing is how you do another thing. Even though sometimes it tends to be used negatively, it simply means how you do one thing is how you do another thing. How you master one thing is how you master another thing. If you don't master one thing, you might not be able to master another thing. But if you master one thing, you'll be able to master multiple things. So I want you to take a step back and look at your life right now and think about it that, okay, has there been times in my life that I've mastered any skill? Has there been time in my business or maybe even in my journey that I found something interesting and I learned how to do that thing? Again, the example I used when I teach this kind of thing, when I teach mastery, is that of cooking a soup, a bowl of soup. So let's say you want to cook a soup. The first time you try to cook the soup, you probably will watch a lot of YouTube videos. And if you're like me, you'll probably go to your mom and ask that, okay, so how do I cook a goosey soup? And that was how I learned a goosey soup, actually. A goosey soup is melon soup. So I went to my mom and asked, how do I cook so kind of soup? And she gave me a list of what to buy, a list of how to do it. And I went back home because then I was a bachelor. I went back home and looking at that list, I was doing everything one after the other, followed exactly how to do it, and I got it. And took a picture and sent it to her. That I made my first egusi soup. But you know the interesting, the second time I used the list again. The third time I used the list, but by the fourth time I had begun to know the things I need to do without necessarily looking at the notes. And so the next time I didn't have to use a note. The fourth time I didn't have to even rely on remembering what to put at what time. But by the time I've done that several times, let's say about 10, 20 times, it had become second nature that today, if I want to cook a goosey soup, even though I no longer cook a goosey soup because of new conditions, what I've begun to do is I just need to put the ingredients together and I let it flow. I create my own style. I create my own way of making that. The same thing when it comes to design. When I learned how to design back in 2002, I literally, in fact, there's a note I have behind me here where I write steps that I took in Photoshop to get certain things. So I had to write them down because I needed to recall how I achieved those things. For some people, they call that SOPs when you're transferring that to someone else because it becomes easier for you to transfer that skill to someone else. But what I did in my own case was because I know I needed to create it for myself, I wrote down the steps I took to achieve those things. So next time I need to create that thing again, I simply have to go back to that list and look at, okay, this was what I clicked there, this was what I clicked there, this was what I clicked here. And so it was easier to repeat that same result the next time. What I'm trying to help you understand is now today, so for example, a couple of days ago, I designed the flyer for the Canva event that I'm hosting in Lincoln with Lincolnshire Black Community Network. And what I did with the flyer, normally, if I were going to do a flyer like that many years ago, I'll need to go look for references and pick items from those references. But today, I don't have to actually look at any reference. In fact, it's the reason why sometimes I don't use Canva templates when I'm designing. I basically start from scratch and do whatever it is that I like. Because I've used principles of design, I mastered elements of design, I've mastered color psychology, I've mastered color usage, I've mastered all those different things. It's easy for me to create a design without having to do a lot of thinking. Well, not that I don't think it when I'm designing. I actually do some thinking, some form of thinking. But the thinking is not so much as, okay, so what color do I have to use here? So what color? Those are not the things that I'm disturbing myself about. Instead, I'm focused on the things that I really, 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 really want to get out. Things like what's the most important information? Then what's the next important information? What are those other things I can add to it to make this flyer a little bit more interesting? Okay, how can I beautify that? Now you notice how I important information, second important information, other information, how do I beautify it? Once that's the approach I've been using for quite a while now, and that has helped me. So again, back to our conversation. How jack of all trades master multiple skills in less time is because we we are able to go between these two models at faster rate than specialists, than people who are not jack of all trades. Now, these two models I've explained to you, the model of 4 competencies and the model of the Dreyfus model of the 5 stages of skill acquisition, the two of them basically describe that we can go from beginner to expert level in a progression, and we can actually jump. So sometimes we can go from a novice who does not know anything about something and literally jump to proficient in it in less time because we are able to compress time. We are able to compress the learning process because that's how our brain works. And each of these models actually also recognizes the fact that competence is not something you arrive at. It's not so much of a destination, but it's something that is part of your journey. The interesting thing is that as unconscious competence, there are also a couple of things that you also begin to learn at the point of unconscious competence. There are things that you will only learn when you get to that expert level as well. And the last thing that I'm going to mention here is that the 2 models that I've shared with you right now actually shows that jack of all trades, just as regular human beings, they simply require a lot of practice, a lot of experience, a lot of reflection in order for them to go from one stage to the other. But they go through that faster than other people. A scientific backend that I will give to that, a scientific, so leveraging on my understanding of neuroscience right now, there are 5 states that the brain gets into. There's alpha, gamma, beta, delta, theta. What is happening is with a jack of all trades, we're able to transition between those states faster. So we're able to get into certain brain states in a way that other people who are specialists may not be able to get into. And I hope that this was helpful and useful to you. I know I've spent the last couple of minutes explaining this to you. And again, because there's no visual, there's nothing visual to show. So that means that for those who are listening to this podcast as audio, they will probably be the one who gets the most benefits than those who watch as video. But of course, again, let me know if this is helpful to you. I would love to hear back from you. This is another episode of the Dio Samuel Report, and I hope that these reports that I brought to you today make sense to you. The way I like to say it, is this: if this report has been useful to you, make sure to like, to subscribe, and more importantly, make sure to tell someone else about this show, because as we go on with this show, again, this is season 1 of this podcast. This is season 1. I'm going to run the podcast in seasons, which means that because I know that I'm a jack of all trade, I'm a generalist. We sometimes get tired of things. We sometimes get fed up of doing certain things the same way. That's why I'm going to be running in season so that I can take a break and come back. When I take a break, do some research, also find things out, find things that, again, I try as much as possible to come from an angle that a lot of people don't talk about. So instead of saying that these are the 5, I like to come from a more comprehensive angle. So sometimes this podcast may be about 30 minutes long, it may be less than that, but the goal is to bring you the report. A lot of it. So, for example, some of these things that I'm sharing with you, I mentioned that I learned the 4 stages of competence back in 2017. I think 2016, 2017 was when I learned that. Now, it's been useful for me, but I've not really shared them publicly. I've only shared them in courses, in programs that I teach, private programs actually. Many of them were not even uploaded to the internet. Many of them happened in very specific groups like Telegram groups, WhatsApp groups. And again, that even brings to mind, if you would like to belong to a group community where you can have conversations about all these different episodes of the podcast that I'm going to be launching, as well as some of the content that I share from my newsletter, please leave a comment, or you can directly send me a message and let me know. You can also reach out to me. diasamuel.com is how you can reach me. Again, just to let you know, this podcast is a solution to a problem that most people don't know that they have. And I know that it's going to take a lot more persons to reach the people that I really need to reach. And this is why I want to ask you right now that if you've enjoyed today's episode, please share this podcast with someone. Share it with someone like you who is also trying to understand how jack of all trades, how polymaths, how generalists, how multi-potentialites master multiple skills at once in less time than most people. All right, this is where I'm going to bring this podcast to an end. I hope that this has been helpful to you, and I appreciate the fact that you've been part of this episode. Thank you very much. This is Dyer signing out here, and I'm going to say I'll see you next week.